Thank you, Rahul, for inviting me here. And I'm so happy to address Sangam Talks. You guys do a wonderful job. You actually get very good speakers across. All your videos are very heavily content based and very very informative. Thank you very much for having Sangam Talks at all. First of all, friends, good evening. I won't bore you, but there'll be a lot of technical data that I'm going to give you in this talk, but I'll make it as interesting as possible. So, polyscientific Ayurveda is a new form of Ayurveda, which is actually deciphered from our own scriptures, from the original Ayurvedic scriptures, by actually translating from the ancient Sanskrit Ayurvedic scriptures, and not only just simply translating, but also by a way of research in which we correlated the fundamentals of Ayurveda with that of modern science, and I have really evolved this into a new form of science, which so then this polyscientific Ayurveda actually involves, it's a multidisciplinary, science in which, you need to understand Ayurveda, because see, the Sanskritam is not a simple language. It's a Nava Vyakaranam Bhasha, which means there are 9 grammars deciphering, each matra. If, for example, if you take uh, one matra in Sanskrit. So Hindi, for example, has about little less than 1700 grammar principles. Telugu has about 1600 grammar principles. But then Sanskritam has about over 200,000 grammar principles classified into 9 different libraries. And according to the Mahabhashyam of Patanjali Maharshi, when you try to understand one matra from each of the one matra in the Sanskrit word, you essentially apply one principle at least from each of the 9 grammars, and so you end up with 9 meanings at least for one matra. If a shabdam or a word has 2 matras, then you essentially end up with 9 to the power of 2, which is 81 meanings. That's how beautifully our ancient scientists, or the grammarians and rishis of India, communicated with us. They spoke less but communicated a lot. So the knowledge of Sanskrit was very important for me to, translate this language as an allopathic doctor into the language of, from Ayurvedic original Sanskrit scriptures into the language of modern science. And not only that, we created, there's certain concepts like, called the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha are not translatable. So we had to create models of these, and I'll show you how we did that. And then we created those models of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in experimental animals, and then translated this knowledge of ancient Sanskrit-based Ayurveda into the language of current science. And what I found, friends, is amazing, that this science is an advanced form of mathematical biology. That's how I see it now. So I became a data scientist as well, I know after unraveling these concepts of data science, in which were ingrained in Ayurveda. And then, I learned Python to actually translate the entire knowledge into a wearable device. And then I'll also show you quickly how we're going to apply this knowledge to understand the COVID situation from possibly the Rishi's drishti or Rishi's vision, and then see how we could actually managing. So this is going to be the summary of my talk. It's going to take approximately an hour. I'll leave a few minutes for question and answers, if at all there arise any. So friends, what is health? See, health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is what the WHO says. But then when you talk about the physical health, there are certain problems, Frank. Why? Because while the definition is superb, there are certain problems in the current form of medicine. Only 15% of the diseases are actually cured. About 45% of the diseases are actually converted from a state of acute state into a chronic state. And about 40% of the diseases, we don't even know why they even occur. That's why they call it etiology unknown. So friends, you see that there is a lot of scope for improvement. That's number one. So when you look at, the most common, before this COVID came in, the most common problem was diabetes across the world, and India was actually was nahi abhi bhi is the diabetic capital of the world. I mean, that's what the numbers say. But when you look at the numbers of various associations, American Diabetic Association comes up with a certain number. American College of Physicians has a different, way of looking at diabetes. American Endocrinologist Association has a different number. So that's what I'm trying to say is the okay, while all these associations are data driven, it's not that they just came up with some number from thin air. No, they have come up based on the data that they have. But why do they have different parameters, to define whether a certain person is diabetic or non-diabetic? Is the question that possibly we're going to answer very soon. And then that's why Indian doctors questions new global norms for diabetes. So the problem arises: how do we standardize? For a certain patient, for a certain individual, what number of glucose or glycated hemoglobin is normal, and what is abnormal for that patient is a big question that we have today. And look at the second biggest problem today is the problem of cholesterol. And then you're given certain drugs called as statins, friends. You all know that statins are drugs given to maintain your cholesterol level within a certain so-called normal level. And statins are actually given to balance, to bring about a cholesterol, healthy cholesterol level in the body, and it improves your health of your heart, is what it says. But then there was a huge study that was done retrospectively. About 92,000 patients were retrospectively analyzed who were prescribed statins. And what this report says is, Hunt study says, is that people above 60, there were different categories analyzed. People above 60, 92% of them ended up with severe forms of senile dementia or Parkinsonism or other forms of, brain disorders that occurred very early in them, number one. Number two is 67% of the whole population ended up with new forms of heart failure. Friends, we are giving statins to improve your heart, and the study finds out that these patients who were put on statins ended up with new forms of heart failure, new forms of liver, kidney failure, and also, rhabdomyolysis is the way your muscle disintegrates. So, cholesterol, according to the guidelines, dietary guidelines, DGAC advisory committee, which actually advises the US FDA and the NIH on the normal nutrient values for Americans, it says cholesterol is not considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption, which means you can have as much cholesterol as possible, and it doesn't affect your health, it seems. That's what this lady has reported to NIH in the year 2015. So, friends, what I'm trying to say is that we have unraveled the human genome in the year 2003, and then what we found was that 3 million genes, out of which we know about 30,000 genes. That's about just 1% of the genome that is known. So, 99% of the genome is actually not known even today. And what even from the 1% of the genome that is known, if you for example, though this number is this way of computing is absurd, what it says is that the possible functions from these 30,000 codons is about 450 million, while we know only 900,000 functions in the body. So what I'm trying to say is, friends, that we know very little about the body, and even 15% of success that we have today, doctors that are, giving you about a 15% success is actually great, because we know less than 1% of genome, and we know 0.007% of physiology, we know 0.00014 of biochemistry, and so on and so forth. So stem cell research, friends, while it's been very encouraging, there were only two credible products that were developed, and in a research that we did way back in 2004 and 2005 in Moscow, we concluded that it didn't help our heart patients. I will talk about this towards the end of our discussion. So, friends, this was the pretext, and this was the context, from which I came to try and understand health from a different perspective, from our own perspective, our own ancient rishis or scientists' perspective. And what I was always reminded was, when I was doing my medicine in Russia, that Yanna Bharate, Tannona Bharate had always been prompting in my mind, because I was trained in in a certain school where Swami always, Satya Sai Babaji always used to say, there's nothing other than there's nothing known better than what we know in Bharat, is what he always said. So with that context and with this prompting from my school, I started understanding Ayurveda. And of course, as I mentioned, that by knowing, at least trying to learn the Paniniyam, the Saraswatam, the Kasakrutsnam, and Aindram grammars, because I could find books referring to these four types of grammars only, while Indram, Andram, Shakalam, Shakadam, Kaumarakam, Saraswatam, Kaumarakam were actually not found by me. But then nonetheless, what Ayurveda mentions, in its Sushruta Samhita, by the way, Russians actually today, even to this day, they mention in their history of medicine that the father of surgery in the modern era comes from India, and his name is Sushruta. That's what Russians taught us in the history of medicine. And they even boldly mentioned that Charaka was the father of medicine for the entire world. They put the times of these two great rishis at least beyond 5,000 years. And what Sushruta Maharshi mentions in this shloka is samadoshaha samagnishtha samadhatu malakriya prasannatma manasindriyanam swasthya itya vidhiyate. What it means is health. Swasthya is the word that is referred to health. Actually, according to the Taittiriya Upanishad, swasthya means swasthanam shiryate iti swasthya. Swasthya is your original state, it's what it says. But then, talking about that original state will take a lot of time. But then your original state is a healthy state. And how do you arrive at your original state is when there is sama dosha, when the doshas, which are the vata, pitta, kapha, are in equal proportion, when they are in a certain samatva in all of the sapta dhatus, or the 7 tissues and 42 organs, then the body ends up curing its own self. It turns into a self-healing machine, is what Maharshi says. So there's a problem here, friends. There are different schools of thought of how sama is understood. Some Ayurvedic physicians, they mention this, that a certain person is born at the time of birth, he has certain prakriti, which involves a certain vata, pitta, kapha proportions of individual organs. And the samatva, according to them, means that you have to maintain that prakriti throughout life, that vata, pitta, kapha proportions of individual organs throughout your life, and then you end up being healthy. There's a slight problem with this definition. Why? Because taking a situation of congenital heart disease, because I'm a cardiac surgeon, we continuously deal with this situations. If a person is born with a congenital heart disease, it doesn't mean that he has to live the whole life with that disease. While this school of thought maintains that the prakriti should be maintained. So there's a scope of proper understanding. That's why we're actually having this talk. First of all, that the proper understanding, according to I'll not say just because of me. I'll prove it through scriptural and through mathematical aphorisms mentioned in our own Sankhya Darshanam, Viveka Chudamani, and Vedanta Panchadashi. What they mention is that this another school of thought which I completely agree to, which I belong, is that thought in which you essentially bring about a balance of vata, pitta, kapha, which means you bring about a proportion, 1:1:1 proportion of these individual doshas in each of the 7 tissues and all of the 42 organs. When you do this, what happens, friends, is the body turns into a self-healing machine and cures its own self. So this again I deduce from various scriptures, because what in the Bhagavad Gita is mentioned is that yoga sama uchyate. So when you say yoga is reconnection. So when you get reconnected to God, you become divine, right? When you're divine, you're healthy. When the state of yoga is achieved, that state is called as yoga. That's why at the end of the yoga, you end up with a state of samadhi. There is a samatva there as well. And what yoga again means is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So when you remove the chitta vrittis, according to Viveka Chudamani again, and also Vedanta Panchadashi, chapter 1, 17 shloka, I'll just see, no, it's not mentioned here. But then this shloka mentions from the Vedanta Panchadashi is, when the chittavrittis are removed, the panchabhutas and hence the doshas are in equal state, it seems. That's what is mentioned in the scriptures, the various scriptures citing this. And also, Maharshi Kapilacharya mentions in the Sankhya Darshanam, 6th chapter, in the first aphorism, he mentions that a dosha is a state where there is cause and effect relationship. When you remove the dosha, there is no cause, no effect. When there is no cause and no effect, then the Panchamahabhutas and hence the doshas which are derived from Panchamahabhutas tend to be in equal state, in equal proportion. So that's why this scientifically, again from our own scriptures, dosha means equal vata pitta kapha proportions in all of the 7 tissues and 42 organs. So this should be called as homeostasis or homeodynamics possibly, because the body is never static. It is continuously, changing. But then there are certain parameters, there are certain levers that maintains this balance. And so when you bring about a vata pitta kapha balance in all of this 7 tissues and 42 organs, at every level of biological interaction, the body attains physical, emotional, social, mental, and spiritual health, friends. This is what theoretically this science mentions. And then when I deep dived into the properties of vata pitta kapha, this was about 28 years I started off reading the scriptures. They made, when you look at this slide, you understand that vata, there are 7 properties attributed to vata, 7 to pitta, and about 7 to kapha. And then when you look at the properties, friends, it says something that which is cold, dry, hard. I mean, it was not really making much sense. And at that time when I was reading, actually, because in biochemistry, we were taught that the body is composed of about 7 million chemicals. And and then this science is, the science of Ayurveda is rotating around, these 3 agents called the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and each of them are attributed by about 7 to 8 properties. And you balance these things, and there was no quantifiable method of balancing, number one. And then it was looking very primitive until I read a book called Rasendra Sara Sangraham, and I figured out that there are more than 2,700 books written just on chemistry, friends. This is really astonishing. I mean, at the time when I was reading. And Rasendra Sara Sangraham mentions Ashitish Chatwalaksha Rasamrutam Swastya Bidite, and the Padma Purana iterates that there are as many jivas, I mean, as many Jantuyonis in the Prapancha. So what it means is Ashitish Chatva Laksha Rasamrutam Swastya Bidhete is what is mentioned in the Rasendra Sarasangra. What it means is there are 8.4 million chemicals, and they were not just referred to chemicals, friends. They were referred to as Rasa Amrutam. They are nectarine chemicals, and they maintain Swastya Bidhete. They maintain your health, is what is mentioned. I was astonished at this number. And then further reading, what it mentions is, it says, the scripture says, Jalaja Navalakshani. Out of these 8.4 million chemicals, Jalaja, water soluble, are 900,000 Navalakshani. Sthavara, non-reactive chemicals, are Vimshati Lakshani, 20 lakhs. And Ghrita, fat-soluble chemicals, are 4 lakhs, Chaturasya Lakshani, and so on and so forth. It didn't stop there. It was just the 2nd verse of the 4th chapter, and it went on and on and on. Friends, this is very, very important. The ancient science of Ayurvedic biochemistry not only mentions the number of chemicals present in the body, but it clearly gives a solubility profile. And this is very, very important, because this, in today's context, this amounts to a very advanced form of analytical chemistry. Because if you need to analyze a certain biochemical or a chemical found in nature, you need to first know its solubility profile. That's the first thing that we know. And today in the body, there are about 7 million chemicals according to the modern biochemistry, out of which we know the solubility profile of only 900,000 chemicals. And moreover, every day, we are actually discovering 10 more new molecules, friends, in the body. This is according to the modern biochemistry. And then what it says is to us that it will take at least 270 years for us to figure out the number of chemicals present in the body. And then you have to do a solubility profile and then do an analysis of these chemicals present in the body and then their interactions and then how do they interact amongst each other and then what kind of effects they're going to produce. And then if you generate a lot of data, apply data science, and then classify them into different groups of chemical reactions. But this ancient science already delivers all that science, friends. It's amazing to notice that ancient science mentions that there are 32 trillion interactions possible because of these 8.4 million chemicals. And the beauty of this is they've already classified them into 21 broad categories. 7 broad categories of these 21 guide all the molecular pathways. 7 of them guide metabolic pathways, and rest of the 7 guide assimilative pathways. And they were classified as Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, friends. This is how beautifully data science must have been applied and arrived at certain correlations, and then they grouped the biochemical pathways into 3 broad categories. And it doesn't stop here. Again, each of these categories are subclassified into 5 sub-doshas. Vata is classified into prana, pana, vyana, udana, samana. I'm not going to go into depth of these sub-doshas because that's going to it'll not end, because this is a part of 545 hours of lectures that I have compiled to actually be able to deliver this science of Ayurveda to this science of polyscientific Ayurveda to allopathic doctors and Ayurvedic doctors to bridge their understanding so that we can communicate with each other. We're not able to communicate, friends, as of yet. So to come back to our topic. So this is how beautifully the ancient science of Ayurveda has helped me understand how these biochemical pathways are interrelated. It says that the Vata, which means the impact of molecular pathways is to metabolic pathways, is to assimilative pathways, needs to be in a ratio of 1:1:1. And once you know these proportions, you know when you have to correct the molecular pathways, when do you have to correct the metabolic pathways, and when do you have to correct the assimilative pathways, becomes very simple as a data science and also as a researcher and a clinician, applying this knowledge in a real-time clinical setup. So, friends, to cut the whole story short, I'll bring in, I come up with a synopsis of what is known for me is that the ancient science beautifully classified not just the biochemistry, but also physiological pathways, immunological pathways, neurological pathways, all the pathways that that make up our body, make up our biochemical interaction and neurophysiological interaction inside the body into broadly Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And the foods are also classified based on their Vata, Pitta, Kapha fingerprint. So what the ancient science says is that once you know, it's not a primitive science. That's what I can say for sure. It's a very advanced science. And what this science says is that once you identify the imbalances, because for us to achieve a sama dosha, the state of sama dosha or balanced doshas in all of the 42 organs, you have to identify the imbalances first. So for that, there's a specific methodology called as the pulse diagnosis. The pulse diagnosis is done in a specific way, friends. Just to give you a quick recap, this is what I usually do to all my patients, and this has replaced my literally all kind of investigations. I just do the Nadi Pariksha and I can completely diagnose an individual. That's what I've been doing the last 18 years. So there are 3 fingers. You put them on the radial artery, the artery that is shown, in the picture, and then use differential pressures at 7 different levels to detect the way the pulse characteristics are. To detect the pulse characteristics, and there's a specific characteristic that attributes to Vata. It's called as a slippery pulse or Sarpagati. In the Pitta pulse is characterized by a Manduka Gati or a bounding pulse, and Kapha is characterized by Swan-like or a Hamsa Gati. So there are different characteristics, friends. This is another advanced science which possibly we'll take up again later. But because, there are more than 800 verses just dedicated to only the physics and physiology of the pulse wave. Okay, physicists here would definitely agree. If you want to characterize a wave in today's, physics, you have 6 or 7 attributes, right? Like the wavelength, the frequency, the velocity, amplitude, and the period, etc. The ancient science of Ayurveda has already given 24 characteristics of the pulse characteristics, the pulse wave, and they have taken into account not just the time domains, but also frequency domains, which is a very advanced science as of today. You apply signal processing to understand frequency domains today, but that science is already given. And not only frequency domains, but also mind domains are explained in Ayurveda. The way you understand Ayurveda, the way you understand the pulse helps you understand the mind domains. That's going to be a very, very advanced form of possible supra-quantum physics. So we'll not touch that, but suffice to say that there's a very advanced form of understanding the body. And with this, you detect the imbalances of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in different organs, in all the 42 organs. Once you know the imbalances in each of the 42 organs and all of the, each of the 7 tissues and 42 organs, then what you do is you map those foods and those exercises, those lifestyle modifications, and also those herbs in a certain extraction way, in a certain extraction method, to bring about a balance of these Vata, Pitta, Kaphas in individual organs. And once you do that, the body cures its own self. Looks beautiful, and then complete regeneration is completely possible. This is all theoretical, friends, until now. And also, I just did okay, friends, this is not to be construed as Ayurveda versus modern science. No, I'm just trying to bring a comparative analysis. I love comparative analysis of anything, literally, of religions, of sciences, of Ayurveda and modern science. But then modern science has given a different aspect, different view to the body. And then I'm trying to bring in that the ancient Ayurvedic perspective to understand the body as a whole. But what I quickly could find as a cardiologist is that, see, if you look at the risk factors of heart disease, on the left you have all the risk factors as mentioned in Ayurveda, and on the right you have the risk factors in allopathy. And friends, it is just translation. That's all. That's all I could find. And also the way the pathogenesis is explained, the way the disease, say ischemic heart disease, the number one killer earlier in the earlier eras before 31st of December 2019. The staging of heart disease is also is nothing different. Actually, it's, for me, it felt as if it was just translated from from Paniniya grammar into English and re-imported in the form of Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. So with this, I want to end this theoretical part of what is actually mentioned in the scripture. So what we did was, this is not enough. Just because someone some time ago had compiled a document and then is giving, in today's world, you have to actually correlate that science and then see if it is applicable in the current day context and see if it is actually solving today's problems. So what we did was, for us to understand homeostasis. See, friends, even in allopathy, homeostasis is actually is well taught to us, and we were told that when the body is in a state of homeostasis, it cures its own self. But we don't know the parameters of homeostasis. So to understand that, what I did was, we created models of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in experimental animals. And this was way back in 2002. What we did was, I created a group of foods that aggravate Vata, that aggravate Pitta in another group, and third group, those foods that aggravate Kapha, and then fed the first group to a first type of foods to a group of rats, in which there were 15 rats. In second group had again 15 rats, which were fed on Pitta diet, Pitta aggravating or Pitta enhanced diet. And third group of 15 rats were fed with Kapha aggravated diet. And then the idea was to create a model of Vata, Pitta, Kapha based on Charaka Samhita, Sutrasthanam, or the principles of medicine as explained in Charaka Samhita. And at the end of 1 month, why 1 month is, Charaka Samhita, Sutrasthanam again mentions that the prabhava of Vata, Pitta, Kapha takes about 2 months to get translated into the tissue component, which means if you eat a certain food with a specific Vata Pitta Kapha fingerprint, for that fingerprint to translate into the tissues, it takes over Dvipakshe, which means a month. So we applied the same principle to understand, because this was one of the primitive studies that we did way back 18 years ago. What we found was really interesting. We later isolated the rats, hearts of the rat, and then because rats, the hearts actually function on their own. They have some certain autonomous nervous system that functions on their own. So my idea was to actually see the way the action potentials are generated. Okay, don't get confused. Well, the action potential is the way in which the external stimulus is converted into an electrochemical message at the site of the receptor. Say, I'm speaking now. You all are listening to this. How is that happening? The sound wave is getting translated, is falling on the tympanic membrane inside the ear, and the tympanic membrane vibrates. At the back, on the other side of the tympanic membrane, you have a certain auditory receptor, which means it receives these signals. So where this vibrations of the tympanic membrane translate into an electrochemical message. The same thing happens at every receptor. If someone touches you, you know that someone touched you because at the site of the touch, you have a touch receptor or a tactile receptor where this electric current gets generated. And this is how this electric current the external impulse is translated into an electric current, and that goes to the brain. The brain then analyzes and then sends back a certain response. That's how we act. So I wanted to check if the Vata, Pitta, Kapha do bring in any change in the way the electric currents are generated in the body. And we really found excellent data corroborating that the Vata, the Pitta, and the Kapha had their own way of responding to external stimulus. As you see, in the earlier slide, I showed that, there's something called resting membrane potential. At minus 90, all the cells rest. Neuronal cells rest. And at minus 65, they suddenly spike up into a positive, there's a sudden influx of sodium ions, and then there's a sudden flux of electricity generated inside the neuronal receptor. And the way it is generated in Vata is that the resting membrane potential in Vata, across all the tissues were minus 65, but in Vata, resting membrane was minus 72. The threshold was same across all the systems, but then the resting membrane in Vata was minus 72, in Pitta was minus 90, it was an average, and in Kapha it was minus 108. What it means is that the Vata tissues required minus 72 minus 65 7 millivolts of external stimulus to translate into an electric current, which means the Vata cells responded for just 7 millivolts of external current. Pitta responded for 25 millivolts and Kapha responded for 43, which means when you have when you give an external stimulus of say 53 millivolts across all the systems, the Vata cells would react 7 times, Pitta twice, and Kapha only once. And then the Pitta cells were almost equal to the control group. The control group were fed with the normal balanced diet of food, a balanced diet. And we saw that the Pitta would correspond to the control group, but they were not similar in a different, it was, we went in deep into biochemistry to understand why they behaved behaved as the way the control group of rats behaved, but then the way the response was elicited is slightly different. But then suffice to say that the Vata systems were hyperreactive systems. The Kapha systems were hyporeactive systems. So this is very, very important, friends, because when you have two individuals or two individuals with the exactly same blood, RBC numbers, RBCs are red blood cells. When you have exactly same, if one of the RBCs is say in a Vata state, it would hyperreact, which means it is spending glucose in a faster way and it is spending energy faster. And so such systems, such RBCs would become fatigued. They become energy depleted very fast. While the Kapha systems react slowly, and hence they could be susceptible to attack of various other foreign bodies. So this is how, if you don't know the Vata, Pitta, Kapha in individual organs, you wouldn't know how they would react actually to external stimulus. And there's a beautiful way of actually demonstrating that demonstrating what was spoken, what was told in the ancient scriptures, and it beautifully corroborates with what is said in the ancient scriptures. Vata is attributed by a property called as a chalatva. You apply the Nava Vyakarana Sanskrit grammar, and we deciphered it as chalatva means not only mobile but also hyper excitable. And this experiment actually proves exactly that Vata is a hyperexcitable state. And Kapha is hypoexcitable. Why? Because the difference for these systems, they require larger external stimulus for them to actually elicit a response, and hence they were characterized by sthira. So Kapha systems are sthira, very, very stable. I mean, they're actually hypo-reactive according to my classification. There are a lot of biochemical ramifications of this understanding, but I'll try and explain this in a way. Why, look at the September 11, 2001. What happened was the World Trade Centers pummeled down, and what happened? One group ran towards the building, one group ran away from the building, and one group was literally dumbstruck. And the external phenomenon, there was just one stimulus, which is the World Trade Center pummeling, created three different reactions. Those people who had pitta ran towards the building to see if they could save anyone, because pitta has those attributes. Pitta makes you sorry Pitta makes a person very brave. He is very logical, and once a decision is taken, he'll stick to the decision. So that's a Pitta state of reactivity. So those people who had Pitta, the firefighters, ran towards the building to save people. Those people who had Vata, they had Chalatva, which means they were really petrified by the incident, and they ran away from the building. And those people who had Kapha possibly in their brains, it took some time for them to actually assimilate and understand what was happening, and then they were literally dumbstruck watching the entire building pummel. And this is the Kapha reactivity. See, friends, this is how behavioral aspects, actually not only behavioral but every aspect of biological interaction, biochemical interaction, or physiological interaction within the body alters at every level of biochemical interaction. Is beautifully explained in Ayurveda. So with this, I'll just close this part of discussion, which took a little longer than I thought. What we did was we kept on creating models of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in individual cells, and created more than 3,000 markers to quantify Vata, Pitta, Kapha in different organs. And we were the first in the world to demonstrate in 2009. I just mentioned, in the beginning, I said, when do you bring about a balance of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in each of the 7 tissues and 42 organs, the body not only maintains health, but also regenerates its own self. And we were the first in the world to demonstrate complete heart regeneration. After we created a heart attack in experimental animals, we gave those supplements, those herbal proportion, that herbal blend, which had a specific proportions of herbs in a specific manner they were extracted, and so that we bring about a balance of Vata, Pitta, Kapha in the heart. For example, the Samana Vata, the Sadhaka Pitta, and the Avalambaka Kapha were planned. That was our rationale. We tried to bring about a balance of these three agents in the heart, and the heart completely regenerated. We filed more than 5 patents across the world. Not only regeneration of the heart, but many organs, vital organs like the brain, the kidney, the pancreas, the liver were demonstrated, and we demonstrated regeneration of these vital organs as well. Filed several patents, and then completely all this knowledge that is generated is called as polyscientific Ayurveda, friends. So understanding immune disorders became very easy, because we were able to, though there are 174 different types of immune diseases, we were able to understand which immune diseases occur because of Vata, which immune diseases occur because of Pitta, and which occur because of Kapha. Once you know this, you actually have to balance that particular dosha or mix up of these doshas that give rise to different manifestations of immune diseases. And then we were able to actually help many people come out of this state. All this knowledge generated of polyscientific Ayurveda in the lab in the form of translational research was again translated into bedside clinical methodology, and we demonstrated, this is all case studies. I'll just quickly show you some angiograms, how we cured many patients. No, because I was, getting trained as a cardiac surgeon. First, cardiac patients used to come. Those patients in whom nothing could be done. These were all left out from by the modern medicine. That at that stage they used to come, and then look at the one of these patients had a block here. After 6 months, the block is gone. We the methodology applied was Nadi Pariksha. Through Nadi Pariksha, identify the Vata Pitta Kapha proportions of individual organs, and then by appropriate personalized dietary, personalized exercise, and personalized herbal supplement regimen, we were able to, certain methodology was evolved, and then we were able to, once we brought about a balance, we were able to demonstrate how not just heart diseases. Look at this, this is another patient, after 6 months, sorry, the first patient completely gets cured. The block that was actually, could not be, this, okay, the first patient did not opt for modern interventions. At that time, we are talking about year 2003, the stents were newly introduced, and then this guy didn't want a foreign body in his body. He was 36-year-old, so he opted to my methodology, and then we were able to help him. The second patient is a female, 54-year-old. Look at this, is a completely blocked vessel. You don't even see it here. This lady had a pitta mediated disease, so her food plan changed, her dietary regimen, exercise regimen, and the supplement regimen was different than the first person. And then after 3 months, she didn't really believe, because she already suffered a major heart attack within 18 months after a CABG or a bypass surgery was done. And after 3 months, she underwent another angiogram, and you see here in the top down left, you see that the vessel slowly opened up. The third, after 6 months, when we did angiogram, that's completely cleaned up vessel. Friends, this is not just with 1 or 2 patients or 3 patients, or more than 700 patients of heart patients who were literally left off. All these patients whom I'm talking are left off from the mainstream. They had no other choice because of various contraindications for either surgery or modern intervention. They were left with no choice other than just live with the disease and then manage somehow with medicines. So such patients were recruited, not just heart patients, but also this psoriasis. This patient was suffering like this for 20 years, with his kidneys failed for 7 years. He was on dialysis. 9 months after the treatment, which again involved a proper Nadi Pariksha, and then understanding his VPK proportions in different organs, is not only psoriasis was gone, but he was actually undergoing dialysis every 2 days. Once, he had 3 dialysis every week for more than 7 years, because his kidneys also failed because of the drugs that we gave. And after 9 months, his psoriasis got cleared, and after 18 months, his kidneys, we put him off dialysis as well. This is how we cured many patients with allergies, diabetes, autoimmune disorders, autism, various chronic infections, including viral infections like Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, hepatitis B, and many other diseases, friends. And in the last 18 years, with about 63% of success. But the success rate I define is being completely independent of allopathic drugs and also Ayurvedic drugs. That's how we measure success as. We were able to achieve this, and then all this knowledge was actually filed into. We filed several patents, over 42. 16 more are being filed right now.